Hello and welcome everybody to my Speedtech tutorial for speedrunning Half-Life. What I'm going to attempt in this tutorial is to give you an overview over the different components of speedrunning Half-Life. Some of those components will be known from speedrunning other games, but the centerpiece of this tutorial is the movement tech and the glitch tech of Half-Life. This tutorial focuses more on a theoretical approach on how the Speedtech of Half-Life is working. It is meant as a document consisting of a PowerPoint presentation, which will be provided for download via a link in the YouTube video description, and recordings of gameplay using a no board for showing controls like key presses or mouse wheel scrolls. It is oriented towards players who are generally interested in Half-Life tech, runners that are interested in optimizing their game, and not the least, mappers who might be interested in what possibilities the gameplay might hold for mapping. It is not necessarily meant for beginners of Half-Life speedrunning, because exploring the possibilities of a game is a big part of the speedrunning experience, and knowing too much about what you are supposed to do might interfere with your own creative search for routes and strategies. This tutorial is mostly about reflecting the Speedtech used in the Half-Life main campaign. The Half-Life main campaign is also called Half-Life Orange, compared to green, which is opposing force, or blue, which is blue shift. It is based on FPS max 100 settings compared to, for example, blue shift having uncapped, that means unlimited FPS settings. This is important because Half-Life physics and, for example, non-player character behavior change with FPS max settings. It is necessary to note that this tutorial is meant to be extensive, but there might be a lot of information you will miss. It is therefore a first version, which might be updated at a later time. The question is, why make a guide just about mechanics? Because most speedrunning tutorials actually make a run through the game and explain the tricks when they are actually occurring. And the answer I found for myself is because the limits of chaining have not yet been reached. Chains are sequences of elemental actions and tricks possible in a game. They are posing the highest demands on speedrunning because they need a clean execution and need to be performed on the first try to save time. By explaining the mechanics used for Speedtech and Half-Life, it is one of the goals of this tutorial to give you a deeper understanding of how to form these chains. This tutorial does not include how to set up your game or BunnyModXT. It is not a chronological run through the game explaining the tricks when they are occurring, as I mentioned before. It is not focused on segmented only strats, although the jump bug is used in speedrunning Half-Life nowadays as well. And it is not focused on scripted strategies. For those information, you find several very good tutorials, for example by Dot, New, or Triads, and also a lot of information in the guide sections of Half-Life on the speedrun.com page. There are some abbreviations that will be frequently used in this tutorial, like BXT, which stands for BunnyModXT, DPS, degrees per second, which is a measurement for the turning speed of your player. Non-player characters, NPCs like scientists or the Barney. Random number generator, which will be known by most other games as well. Unit, which is the elemental measurement of Half-Life mapping. And UPS, units per second, which is the speed measurement for horizontal speed. Before starting out, I want to thank some people that actually helped me out quite a lot understanding the game, and I really hope I did a good job. That is first of all Maze Runner, who provided a in-depth tutorial on the physics of Half-Life. Yalta, who has made the BunnyModXT program for Half-Life speedrunning, and also knows a great deal about tasks of the game. And Parkles, who is a very good Half-Life and opposing force speedrunner, who also helped me out a lot understanding some of the stuff that is going on in the game. In this tutorial, I'm going to categorize different kinds of skills that I find necessary to speedrun Half-Life. First of all, coordination, that is mostly concerned with the interface and how you read the game, or what gadgets actually help you to read what you are doing in the game. Then the centerpiece, of course, is the movement tech. And the last one, which is not the least important, I have to say, is the level design knowledge. How is the level built up and what are difficulties to overcome? The first chapter, coordination, I want to make rather short because it is actually a lot of stuff to read and understand and try out in the game yourself. It is consisting, in my opinion, of key management, the interface, and how you actually keep an overlook in-game. Key management and how to use the interface is actually considering how you are binding commands to keys. Those commands, in my opinion, can be roughly categorized into movements, functions, menu commands, and BXT commands. First of all, how you bind those commands is always the same. If you're doing it right into the console, in the game, or in a separate user config. I have provided my own CFG so that you can actually have a look at how you can organize your config for overview. Movement commands can be roughly categorized into movement directions, which are all 320 units per second in speed, and movement modifications like ducking, jumping, and walking. It is important to note that you need to have duck and jump on keys as well as bound on mouse wheel, either mouse wheel up or down. Functions, of course, are attacking, using, like cannons or pushable objects, reloading, and FPS max binds for various tricks. Impulse 100 is the flashlight, and Force Center View forces your view to 0 degrees pitch. For the test chamber skip, you might also want to have some graphic change so that you can see the pixels for alignment. Direct weapon binds directly pull out the weapon you want to have, whereas category weapon binds have slots where you have to choose the position of the weapon and have to affirm this position before you can use it. This, of course, makes a difference in time. Commands without a plus give an effect to the game just once when pressed, so if you want to renew this command, you have to press it again. Whereas commands with a plus continuously affect the game, for example when having a machine gun and pressing plus attack. It is noteworthy that you can actually interrupt a reloading process of a weapon when you change to another weapon. This is important to save some time. It is also interesting to know that when you hold plus use, you can manage movement speed according to the FPS max settings. There are some important menu commands, most of all the save quick and load quick commands. It is important to know that the load quick 01 will try and access the second last quick save you made, and this is not available on all the versions that are played on for speedrunning Half-Life. Also note that if you are executing a load command while a load is still in process, the game will crash. These further commands are most important for setting up the game. I think they are pretty much self-explanatory, and you might just want to go in-game and try them out yourself. BXT commands can only be used if you are having BunnyModXT installed. This first page of BXT commands is especially necessary for setting up your demos for later run verification. To do that, you need a run starting bind to make it easier for you to start the game, set up the timer, and record your demos. The second page of BXT commands is for displaying information, most of all BXT HUD speedometer. This is especially important to maintain your overview over what you are doing and how fast you are progressing. BXT HUD view angles is used to adjust your position and line up for important tricks. The last page of BXT commands is mainly for practice, and they are all not allowed in runs. Most important here might be BXT show triggers 1 to know where the triggers are and route the game accordingly. When setting up your bindings on your keyboard and your mouse, you have to keep in mind your key management. I'd suggest thinking of categorizing keys into 3 layers, which are differently accessible. The first layer has to be quite automatic and intuitive in execution. This concerns all the plus commands that are continuously affecting the game, the quick save command, which you might also have bound on 2 separate keys, and your most used weapons like the shotgun, the crowbar, or the machine gun. The second layer is commands that are easily accessible but can also be consciously executed. So you might just have a look at your keyboard when you need them, for example. This contains the FPS max bindings, which have to be fairly quickly accessible, so they are kind of in the middle between the first and the second layer. The quick load command, which is not that frequently used and shouldn't be in your way when you're trying to access more crucial commands. The force center view, which you need for just a few tricks, and some less used weapons. Then, of course, you're having external commands which are not really important in-game. These are, for example, stopping the demos, starting the run, or setting up the graphic settings for the test chamber skip. In comparison to most other games, saving and loading are actually fairly quickly executed commands in Half-Life. Therefore, they play an important role in speedrunning the game. I would not say quick loading is an unimportant command, but of course you usually would only use it if you're making a mistake and have to get back in another situation where you still have the control over your game. But to actually be able to not lose too much time, it is important to be able to quick save during any kind of process. For example, in on a rail, where mistakes and losing speed is quite frequent. It is therefore important that you make frequent saving in controllable situations, so that you are still possessing full control over what you want to do and have all the options open to continue the game, maybe even on another path than you chose before. There are 2 glitches used as tricks in Half-Life that are connected to quick saving and quick loading commands. The Ammo-Duplication-Glitch. When you kill a soldier, he will drop the weaponry that he possesses. When you quick save during his death animation that lasts about 3 seconds and quick load again, the game will think the soldier has not yet dropped his weaponry. You can get as much ammunition out of a soldier that way as many times as you repeat this cycle. With the save load glitch, you can cancel the attacks of enemies, most of all Vortigons. When they charge up electricity to fire at you, you have some time to quick save and quick load again, so that they have to repeat their charging process from the beginning before they can fire at you. You can repeat this process as many times as you like and get past any Vortigons without getting hit. The standard FPS max setting is 100. For various tricks, it is important though to be able to change FPS max settings such as edge bugs, which we will come back to later, and NPC abuses. Although it might not be as important as first layer commands, it is sometimes necessary to be able to execute FPS max settings changes within parts of a second. There are several applications for changing FPS max settings. For example, on FPS max 20 settings, non-player characters turn a lot faster than on FPS max 100 settings. It is said that in FPS max 8 settings they turn fastest, but then you will have huge difficulties maneuvering through your game. Tripmine-Clipping works that way that shortly before you jump through a laser, might it be a trigger hurt laser or a tripmine laser, you can reduce FPS max to 4. This cancels the input of the laser in the game, and the game will not think that you actually touched it. You can reduce fall damage by lowering FPS. You can also change physics of objects when you push them. That way you can adjust your FPS considering the object and the distance you want to push it. And of course, lowering FPS max settings to lower values makes edge bugs and slide bugs much easier. I have to admit I'm not completely satisfied with this category, but there was some stuff I wanted to address that I find necessary as a skill for speedrunning Half-Life that didn't really fit in very well in any other category. So here is the in-game overview consisting of Hud-Functions and routing. Hud-Functions means for me especially looking at BXT HUD speedometer. With this, you can actually monitor your speed in different situations. For example, when going for chains, when adjusting the angle for wall strafing, or when doing certain tricks like object boosting or push trigger water boosting. For those, it is actually important to see if you're having the speed you need to finish the chain, or if it might be necessary to load back to a former position. Another application for BXT HUD speedometer 1 monitoring is to see if you're actually having a good Bhop precision. This is concerning Scroll-Tech coming afterwards. When you're losing speed every time you hit the ground, you might actually want to work on your Scroll-Tech. Maybe not as important, but also useful is the BXT HUD timer 1 command for monitoring timing. This I find especially useful for grenades, which are exploding exactly after 3 seconds. Alternate crosshairs can be applied in the game with external programs, and those are especially important or useful for explosives, with which you usually don't have a crosshair. This way, it makes it much easier to place explosives. Routing is something that is naturally covered by tutorials running through the whole game. So here are just some basic ideas about this because it's still a pretty important skill factor. You need to have an eye on health and armor management and of course on their balance, because some tricks require you to actually have a minimum amount of armor, otherwise you won't make the jump. Ammo is something that needs to be fetched at certain spots and needs to be looked at over the run. I've already said something about save management, but also a part of this is to know where the autosave positions are, and this is part of level design knowledge, the third chapter in this tutorial. The best concept you can actually follow is consistency, which is kind of an overall term for describing the skill of your run. It is worth a great deal more having a feeling for the drive of the game than trying to do too hard tricks that you might fail and lose a lot of time with. The second big, and what you might consider the main chapter for the Speedtech of Half-Life, is the movement tech. I'm going to try and go over all of the movement tech that is important when taking up speed in Half-Life. For this, we first have to understand basic movement concepts, that is, physics of the game as far as I can understand it from the outside. It is actually pretty complicated, as documented by Maithrunner in his in-depth tutorial about the physics of the game. Strafe-Tech is starting on the ground, and therefore we will consider ground strafing as our first objective before going over to bunnyhopping. Ladder mechanics have their own properties, as do water mechanics. You can work with slopes, get onto them, and take up speed. And in the end, of course, we will have a look at the several techniques that consider boosting. Collision is actually a term depicting two objects hitting each other with speed, for example when hitting a wall. For game design, this concept has been adapted to describe the solid nature of floors, walls, ceilings, and other material objects. We then say those objects have collision. In terms of speedrunning, it is important to know that you lose speed when touching objects sideways. Ground friction similarly can be understood that way, as it is applying friction to the player movements, limiting his maximum ground speed. When touching ceilings, you lose no speed at all. This makes it possible to, for example, bunny hop in vents, while it might still be difficult to time your jump inputs or avoid touching the sides. Some of your weapons have collision qualities and can be used for tricks. Hornets, for example, act like physical objects, making it possible to open and close doors, blocking their movement. Also, they are used for a fast teleport to Zen in Lambda Core. Snarks can be used to climb walls by stacking them on top of each other. Because they will always go to the nearest target, they try to reach you, even vertically. Trip mines become solid as soon as they are activated and can be used as steps to jump on. It is important to be careful not to place them too high so that you can still reach them. Grenade stacking so far is only used in the Half-Life modification They Hunger, where you place one grenade on top of another to push it through a door and explode a blocking crate. As mentioned, all of the movement direction commands give you 320 UPS speed. Walking reduces your speed to 120 UPS. Moving while crouched reduces your speed to 1/3 of the movement direction speeds, which is about 106 UPS. Jumping takes you up onto 45 units tall objects. It takes about 2/3 of a second from leaving the ground to hitting it again. Duckjumping is one of the most important elemental movement techs, reaching you up onto 63 units tall objects. The Longjumpmodule is not used in speedrunning the Half-Life main campaign. It gives you a maximum of 560 UPS when having a 0-degree pitch with the force center view command. It works when having a minimum speed of 50 UPS, holding plus duck and jumping. As mentioned, pressing plus use changes your speed with different FPS max settings. It can also be applied when being crouched, making very precise positioning possible. Strafing is one of the unique concepts of Half-Life Speedtech. It means getting speed when changing the direction of moving. The easiest Strafe-Tech is Strafewalking. This concept is inherited from older FPS games like Doom. When applying plus speed to your movement direction commands, it normally gives you 120 UPS. When, for example, going forward and moving left or right, your speed will increase to a maximum of 169 UPS. For similar reasons, Wallstrafing gives you more than 320 UPS speed. When, for example, pressing into a right-hand wall and pressing plus forward and move right, those two commands amplify and produce Wallstrafing. Tied to a FPS max setting of 100, the most speed you can get from Wallstrafing is 489 UPS when running and 163 UPS when being crouched. The optimal angle to achieve this max Wallstrafing speed is turning 7.25 degrees into the wall compared to a parallel view alongside the wall. Ground strafing, first of all, simply means strafing without jumping. To understand the concept of ground strafing, we need to introduce some components. The concept of movement directions has already been mentioned and means to move the player with the 4 movement commands. Horizontal mouse input means the horizontal turning of the player, which is usually done with the mouse and therefore labeled as mouse input. Those two together make up what I want to conceptualize as the movement force, because they are both possible to influence via your inputs. To analyze those concepts, let us first of all imagine running in a circle just using movement directions via movement commands. Because your movement commands by themselves never exceed 320 UPS for one direction, they should never exceed 320 UPS ground speed as a whole. As you can see, circling movements only done with movement commands achieve a higher speed than 320 UPS. The reason for this is an additional force that I want to call centrifugal force. This concept is quite comparable to what you would call momentum in other speed games. But its value for Half-Life movement tech actually is that it is scored by circling movements, which very much compares to the centrifugal force in real-world physics. The centrifugal force is additionally pushing the player into the direction his overall movement was directed so far. For a player moving in circles, this force is always pushing tangential to the movement direction circle. The easiest way to clarify this concept is to substitute a key for the horizontal mouse input and combining it with movement direction keys, which can be seen as a raw input situation. In this condition and under normal settings, the player is describing a perfect circle with constant 423 UPS speed. This doesn't only hold true for going forward, but movement direction and horizontal mouse input key presses can be combined in as many ways as there are combinations of the two. Our working concepts are now the movement force with which you command your player to move via inputs, and the centrifugal force, which is kind of the energy the player possesses having been pushed into a certain direction. When now looking at the concept of ground strafing again, it becomes clear why horizontal mouse input has to go into the movement direction, because it follows the pathway of the centrifugal force the player already has built up. Following some experiments on the combination of movement commands with horizontal mouse inputs in degrees per second, this graph shows their interdependency of maximum achievable speeds by ground strafing. These values have been produced by pressing keys for a movement command, for example plus move left, and a turning command, for example plus left. The degrees per second has been varied by changing CL yaw speed command, which defines the turning speed in DPS for turning left or right with key presses. This graph shows us at what turning rate certain speeds become possible to achieve, because the centrifugal force can either be followed and amplified or cancelled according to your further turning inputs. It gives us values that can be looked at and learned with for building muscle memory to achieve certain speeds for ground strafing. It can't tell us that much about the optimal curvature of acceleration, only how best to approach them when forming your movement. As you can see, the ground strafing speeds, for example for 120 DPS and 470 DPS, are about equal. The reason for this again is that UPS from turning are limited to either not enforcing the pathway of the centrifugal force enough, or cancelling it by applying counter-amplifying movement force. Another thing we can approximate from this kind of experimental setup is the maximum achievable ground strafing speed, which reaches its high at 498 UPS with a constant turning speed of 293.5 DPS. For practical purposes though, it has to be mentioned that the acceleration decreases drastically the closer you get to the maximum speed. In-game, it is therefore recommended to reach a decent ground strafing speed and then going over to Bhop-Hopping. In conclusion, there is the movement force, which you can influence the player with, and the centrifugal force, which you have to follow to gain the speed limits of the game. Those lead to acceleration when you smoothly drive your movement force according to the existing centrifugal force, and cancel each other when your movement force is acting against your current centrifugal force. This makes us now ready to control the speeds unleashed by escaping the constraints of ground friction when bunny hopping, because bunny hopping works no different than ground strafing when considering the buildup of speed. For limiting ground friction to a minimum, you need Strafe-Tech. Bhop-Tech, on the other side, is referring to a wealth of combinations of the already mentioned elemental movement possibilities. According to FPS max settings, it is practically possible to hit a plus jump input right the frame you hit the ground to make the game not apply any ground friction. The more frames you are registered to be on the ground, the more speed you will lose. Scroll rates as 50 or 33 as a function of the FPS max value 100 divided by integer values are best to score a plus jump input when hitting the ground. At a certain max rate, however, the game will not be able to register your scroll inputs anymore, resulting in speed loss. Steady scrolling and smooth movement seem to work out best to make the game register your inputs cleanly. For Bhop-Tech, we first want to consider the limits of turning considering controllable max speeds, which is tied to crouched Bhop as well. All the other techniques can be summed up as speed management. DPS limits are concerning the maximum DPS when having certain UPS speeds. This graph shows the UPS limits that you can achieve experimenting with movement command and turning key press combinations. Deriving from this, you can say as a rule of thumb, you have to take wider turns the higher your speed gets. More as a theoretical concept again, there is an optimal curvature for highest acceleration, which is too difficult to be calculated and shown here. As for the centrifugal force cancellation at extremely high turning speeds, here is a demonstration of your max UPS at a DPS of 10,000, which will basically make you jump on the spot. When being crouched, the DPS turning speed limits are 3 times as severe, equally to the 3 times smaller general moving speed. Considering Strafe-Tech, it can be as clean when running, but it has to be timed according to the differently perceived height differences from the ground. For understanding what duck-rolling does, we first need to inspect crouch mechanics a little more closely. When standing on the ground, applying a plus duck key press takes the player 0.4 seconds to fully crouch. This also goes for running, where the speed decrease to 1/3 of running UPS will go into effect after 0.4 seconds. When being in the air, however, fully crouching will instantly go into effect. When you are standing on the ground, pressing a plus duck key and releasing it within those 0.4 seconds, you will slightly be lifted up comparable to a small jump. Duck rolling then employs this principle when spamming crouch by having a plus duck bound to mouse wheel, making those same small jumps at a more rapid rate. Being in the air of course reduces ground friction to maintain your gathered speed from bunny hopping. Being able to keep most of your speed when duck rolling, it can be intermixed with Bhop patterns itself. A trick derived from this concept is double ducking, lifting you up from the ground and crouching you again mid-air to perform a somewhat smaller duck jump, which lifts you up onto 35 units tall objects at a maximum. Because duck rolling has the potential to lift you up in the air, it can be used to quickly transfer you into a crouched state, conserving the speed you had when running. This is especially useful in tight spaces. When in the air and pressing duck, you can release it again shortly before hitting the ground. This affects that you have a longer time in the air and therefore get farther, but also get back to your standing height to continue normal b-hopping. This is especially used to manage inputs on steep ramps. Depending on with which side you approach the ladder, you can climb up or get off the ladder. Ladder speeding is a trick very similar to Wallstrafing. Your normal vertical speed on ladders is 200 UPS. By applying two adjacent movement commands pressing into the ladder, those amplify and increase speed to 400 UPS max. To maintain your position on the ladder, it holds you when touched. This makes it possible to fall onto a ladder from great heights to cancel possible fall damage, which is called a ladder grab. With the 400 UPS from ladder speeding, it is also possible to vertically boost yourself onto objects. Reducing FPS max to lower values additionally helps to increase your height. For effectively using ladders, you need to get a feeling for the way it restrains the player's movements. In water you can usually only have a speed of 255 UPS, which is equally distributed horizontally and vertically, depending on your swimming angle. When swimming on water holding plus jump, you can apply Strafe-Tech and theoretically reach speeds of more than 500 UPS. You can jump out of the water looking straight and press plus forward to swim up. The same height cannot be achieved with plus jump, although trying to get up onto 35 units tall objects outside the water is automatically done by holding plus jump and pressing onto it. Sharking refers to the fact that you only gradually lose speed that you have built up on the ground when jumping onto and holding plus jump on the water. Half-Life level design pushes barrels in water by implementing a push trigger. You can use this push trigger to do water boosting by quickly tapping in and out of the trigger and keeping your speed by sharking on the water. Depending on the height of the trigger, you either just have to swim on top of the water and spam plus duck inputs, because for example the trigger in residue processing is 17 units under the water. In Blast Pit, however, the push trigger is at water level and you need to jump out of the water to gain height before you can spam plus duck inputs to gain speed. For hitting the frames when duck rolling, scroll tag is important as well. Doing water boosting can get you up on the ground next to water. This, however, is a somewhat unstable trick. Underwater, you can apply plus use to the push trigger and advance with the push trigger's speed, like on an underwater conveyor. In Blast Pit, the water goes over into a waterfall with an increased push speed of 600. This you can use to boost out of the water and jump into the nearby pipe. When a ramp has more than 45 degrees pitch, it cannot be walked on anymore and is called a slope. Slopes up to 75 degrees pitch can be moved on with Slope-Tech. You can slide up a slope by perpendicularly pressing into the slope. You can surf a slope when looking into the slope for going up or looking away and gaining speed. The slide bug works as a translation of your centrifugal force according to your direction of travel and the alignment of the slope. Slide bugs are used to prevent fall damage or to take up speed. They are sometimes combined with edge bugs and therefore used with lowering FPS max settings. You would, for example, call these two tricks here rather slide bugs than edge bugs because they actually work with the slope. However, it is likely that to perform the slide off those small slopes, it initially is important to edge off of them to not get damage. Boosting is one of the most interesting phenomena in Half-Life, but also one of the most difficult to execute cleanly without losing time. It is possible to boost from getting damage of any kind, to get backward boosts from Gauss discharges, as well as from pushing objects. Damage is something you usually get from enemies. One of the famous enemy damage boosts is the old Vortigaunt jump to skip parts of the test chamber. Damage boosts you away from its origin, for example an explosion. It gives you more speed when you are crouched. Damage boosting relies on health loss, not on battery loss. This is important for a health-armor balance for managing tricks. Depending on the trick you want to do, it might be interesting to know that different explosives and the self-gausses give you different damage. For analyzing grenade boosting, we need to define vertical mouse positions first. On the BXT HUD view angles, we see that minus 90 degrees pitch equals looking up. 0 degrees pitch equals looking forward with forced center view, and 90 degrees equals looking down. We will first assume that the player is standing without moving and performing a duck jump and exploding a grenade at the same time. When looking down, the grenade will boost you up. The same happens when looking up, but the boost is slightly higher. Most probably because you are closer to the grenade, jumping towards it. Looking forward, the grenade will boost you up and backwards. When having 40 armor or more, grenade jumps in experimentation were only successful up unto 151 units tall objects. Note that the plus jump input is just an additional upward thrust. An upward grenade jump can be executed from a crouch position as well. We will now take movement into consideration. When going forward and duck jumping, the player will jump up and down, making a small curve with different jumping positions and according different pitch angles of his forward jump. The first jumping position is right when lifting off and has the biggest upward thrust. The second jumping position is best suited for setting up highest speed boosts. The third jumping position is where all the upward thrust is equaled with gravity, and the player has a 0 degree pitch parallel to the ground. When running forward, performing a duck jump and releasing a grenade at the same time, which equals jumping position 1, we again get different results depending on the player's vertical mouse pitch. When looking down, you get the least damage, the most vertical lift up, but the least horizontal speed. The more you look up, the less you boost the upward movement of your jump, the more horizontal forward speed you'll get. There are limits of controllability the higher you look, because of the increasing downward thrust of a grenade exploding above you. Generally, it can be said that aligning the pitch angle of your jump with a vertical mouse input pitch will give you the most damage and the most speed. For example, at jumping position 3, which is 0 degrees pitch in its angle, you would have to have a 0 degree vertical mouse input pitch as well to get the highest speed. A release delay is differently long for grenades and SMG grenades. SMG grenade boosts often differ in height, mostly because the explosion on the ground is almost immediate, while the release of a grenade being held in your hand is delayed slightly longer. There is a variety of possible combinations of explosive boosting. Important to note is that when your overall centrifugal force upwards is gone, boosts will only do little to gain further height. In principle, and with a clean execution, it can be said that only the max height of Half-Life maps of 8,192 units seem to be the limit for upward grenade jumping. You can combine ladder speeding with grenade boosting as it is done in opposing force. This just is a question of timing commands, leaving the ladder, getting crouched to maximize the boost and release the grenade quickly. A similar application you find with the satchel in the main campaign. Grenades can be used to break several crates at a time. By placing them correctly, you can inflict damage on a larger radius around destroying even more crates. This also sometimes unintentionally can happen when a grenade is covered, for example, by an enemy. Going through a change level trigger resets the timer for your grenade, preventing you from doing boosts immediately. A connected problem is the change level grenade bug when charging a grenade, going through a trigger, and changing weapons. When you change back to the grenade, the game will not receive your grenade as being held by plus attack anymore. You have to renew plus attack by pressing it twice. Shooting certain walls with a less than 45-degree divergence from perpendicular impact reflects the Gauss charge back onto the player and is referred to as self-Gauss. Duck jumping shortly before the Gauss charge hits, you can damage boost up onto obstacles. Here you see a series of self-Gauss tests. As you can see, the higher the Gauss charge, the higher the damage, the higher the possible boost of the self-Gauss. Because you usually have to look at your health management, higher Gauss charges won't be possible to use most of the time. Also, the higher your Gauss charge, the thicker the wall needs to be to reflect it back. Charging up your Gauss gun, you can shoot behind you and give you a horizontal boost into the direction you're traveling. In single player, it is not possible to gain vertical boosts from Gauss boosting. The energy deviation from a 0-degree pitch achieved with the force center view command will simply vanish. In some places, it is possible though to make a collision boost up on certain slopes or small obstacles, to gain height and jump over abysses. Knowing this, you can manage your speed at too high Gauss charges. With the Zero-Ammo-Gausscharge glitch, you start charging up the Gauss gun and apply plus use to a usable object. Because the Gauss charging is not registered during applying plus use, you can charge the Gauss gun without ammo consumption and still get a full Gauss boost. Brute launching is a glitch not used in speedrunning mainly for the time it takes to set up. It consists of getting stuck on the side of a trip mine and boosting one or more Gauss charges. The added up speed the Gauss charges would cause remains latent until freed from the trip mine. Charge load management refers to the problem that it is not possible to pass change level triggers with Gauss charges. On pre-steam pipe versions, however, it is possible to save Gauss charges and load back to them. Object boosting is one of the most difficult techniques because it heavily relies on muscle memory and needs to be controlled frame perfectly for certain tricks. When you apply plus use to an object, the object is gaining push speed up to 2000 UPS. During applying plus use to the object, the player and the object share this speed. The speed goes over to the player when releasing plus use at the moment the wanted speed is achieved. The first step in learning object boosts is to know how the application time of plus use changes the speed the player gets, and when to release it from the box. The next step is to try and time the plus jump input to make it over edges. Plus jump is the necessary input to make the unforeseen consequences object boost, but it can for example be exchanged by duck rolling as well. Then you might want to work on changing your looking direction as another element of controlling the object boost situation. As soon as you've managed that, you can try and change course. This is important for later chains, like the test chamber skip. It is a question of taste to prefer object boosting while standing or running by. It is possible to do downward object boosting from above. Backward object boosting needs careful setup. For forward object boosting, you usually need to shoot the box because it frequently blocks your way. The last chapter of this tutorial is concerned with level design knowledge. Knowing how the world is built up gives you an insight of why things are working additionally to a pure in-game approach from playing. While all of these different aspects of level design are important, the centerpiece of this third chapter, no doubt, is trying to understand the nature of NPCs and how to work with them. Cracks is a word we use to describe mostly certain floor elements that are prone to make the player stuck and lose all his speed. If you follow this idea, you can find different forms of cracks that are somewhat related in their nature. Every ramp has a crack on its upper end. The reason for this is an uneven transition between the end of the ramp and the adjacent floor part, or brush, which is an elemental building piece of the collision-based 3D world. Especially when hitting them with speed, the game takes the slightest height difference and makes it affect the player like hitting a wall. The best way to overcome ramp cracks is to lift your feet, for instance with duck jumping or crouching mid-air to prevent the player from hitting them. Floor cracks are similar, but they are situated between two even floor brushes. Most floors do not pose this problem. A chapter filled with floor cracks, however, is for example on a rail. Elevator cracks again are kind of a malfunction in managing height differences. Here, the player gets stuck in the elevator and additionally receives damage by blocking the elevator's movement. When entering a new level via a change level trigger, you do not continue in the same room. The room you're now in has been copy-pasted into a new map file which you are now in. To synchronize those two different, apparently equal rooms, two info landmarks, one on either map, has to be at exactly the same position. Therefore, the most likely cause of getting stuck here is an uneven transition due to a slightly imprecise info landmark placement. Another possible reason could be that the level change itself is prone to wrong transitions of the player's movement direction. The four most important triggers are change level triggers, trigger once, which activate events necessary to continue the game, trigger hurt, which damage you, and autosave triggers, which make an automatic save file you can load back to. First of all, we are using BXT show triggers 1 to show the triggers. As you can see, the first trigger has to be met so that this cutscene is starting. Here you see how a trigger hurt is affecting the player. This is a change level trigger. Here you have a lot of trigger ones that actually organize this cutscene. And this was the first autosave trigger, where I just loaded back to show you. Here again, several trigger ones to organize this cutscene surrounding Barney. And the jump through the window, where the change level trigger is right in front of. Another one, with the autosave right behind it. And here a room full of trigger ones that are again orchestrating this random scene. Here again a trigger for Barney, a cutscene, change level trigger, an autosave, and a trigger once that makes the hound eye spawn. When considering NPCs, I find it most useful to divide their nature into behavior, which shows in action, and decisions, which guide their behavior. Decisions determine an action plan that is then carried out according to certain behavioral rules, according to different situations and pathways mapped as info nodes on the ground. Those can be seen by the BXT command BXT show nodes 1.
For God's sake, open the silo doors! They're coming for us! It's our only way out! Oh my God, we're doomed!
NPC's behavior is organized in consistent elements. As you can see here, Barney has decided to go to a point in the map which most likely is too close to the wall to be reached. He repeats his action to go towards the wall in a trial and error mode several times before he gives up his decision and remains where he is. When NPCs have decided on an action, they have to carry it out before being ready for another action. One of the elemental actions is the 5-step unit of NPCs. When you push them, and they try to go opposite to the direction of pushing, they will either make 5 steps or no steps at all. Although you might naturally think so, The decision for an action comes slightly after the initial step of carrying the action out. We might call this decision delay. First, you see that the NPC does not have enough room and is blocked too quickly to decide on fleeing down the hallway. If he has run into the direction of the hallway for a long enough time, which is still less than half a second, he keeps his plan to do so. But because he has no other choice at the moment, he will fill the time with an evasive maneuver until he feels able to carry out his plan. Very much like Barney trying to walk into a wall, here we see the trial and error procedure of the scientist wanting to go down the hallway until he realizes the decision cannot be put into action and at least temporarily has to be changed. The least sign that the scientist has made a decision is kind of a choppy, sort of stumbling animation that indicates an interruption. Here, look at his feet again. This time, his try to run down the hallway was blocked so quickly, it was not solidified as a decision yet. It is then that the NPC abuse will be successful and the scientist opens the door. As a result of his immediate blocking, the scientist furthermore will dismiss his first plan going down the hallway and will instead form a new decision to go to the elevator. As you have just seen, the NPC was made to decide on an action by hurting him. NPCs also react to nearby gunfire or the estimated physical impact of a threat, like the radius of a grenade about to explode. With grenades you can guide an NPC to go a certain way when timing them, so he is free to decide on a new action again. Even when NPCs don't see a grenade, under certain conditions they will still be aware of it. For example, firing a SMG grenade on a wall close to the NPC. When an NPC sees you or feels threatened by being seen as well, he will react. Here you can see how the scientist changes positions, reacting to the line of sight of the player. About the decision making of NPCs, there are some things you have to bear in mind. Lowering FPS max values makes the NPC turn faster, so he is quicker to go over to the next elemental action, like running towards you to execute a plan. The higher the FPS max value, the slower the NPC is turning, the more time on the other hand you might have to pass by without a fight. Lowering FPS max will not always make the scientist react more quickly. For some actions, like the very first NPC abuse, it doesn't make a difference. NPC's behavior is kind of not completely ready when first entering a map. On the one hand, this can be to your advantage, so the NPC will not be too attentive. On the other hand, you might want to preload an NPC by entering the map he is in, leaving it, and entering it again to make him ready for action. With unclean execution or too much fighting going on around the NPC abuse, the NPC can get stuck between decisions so that he has to reorient himself. Here, you first see a quick orientation reaction of Barney fleeing the grenade. He was ready to decide on and commence a new action. Now you see a disorientation, an indecision between possible actions, which makes Barney bug out. You can clearly see the sign looking at the rapid actions of his head being undecided between directions to choose. Having understood the nature of NPC's decision making, NPC abuses simply are a consecutive application to guide NPC's behavior, mostly to open doors for us. This is possible because NPCs are able to open those doors where two of their info nodes are placed on either side of the door. Possible starting points for an NPC abuse are, to repeat it once more, to block him, to hurt him, or to threaten him most of all with explosives. You now have to route the NPC-Abuse. Taking We've Got Hostiles again, you start by hitting a trigger starting the scripted scene of the scientist. Then you hit the scientist and position yourself to make him decide on going to the door. Once he reaches the according info node and the door opens, you can go on even without the scientist. As you can see, it is possible to speed this process up a lot, making meticulous NPC-abuse strategies. Note that you can't load back into the map the NPC-abuse should take place. NPCs will then be unable to open the door. As you can see, the second time when loaded into the map, he tries to go through, but again gets stuck in a trial and error loop. As mentioned before, NPCs are usually not fully attentive and ready to start actions when just entering a map. Similarly, you can use their need to align to start actions on you in fights. For example, approach this headcrab with going forward, looking at it, line of sight. The headcrab will instantly attack you. When approaching the headcrab backwards, however, it kind of doesn't even see you as well. When in a fight, you can make NPCs kind of duck and cover from the threatened impact of a grenade. Sometimes NPCs can be aligned so they block each other. To not get blocked by the rear zombie, you have to stay on the right side of this hallway. In Office Complex, you can alert the headcrabs by breaking the ceiling or starting wallstrafing too soon. Don't break it, and walk the first part before wallstrafing, and jumping does the trick. Just to mention it again, the safe load glitch cancels especially Vortigaunt's charge up to pass by. There is not really that much to show about NPCs being RNG. For completeness, note that sometimes you cannot but kill an enemy to control the situation. Edge bugs work when being on and off an edge on one frame, so the game doesn't register fall damage. For intentional tricks, you always want to reduce FPS max settings for that. As mentioned, edge bugs and slide bugs sometimes are undecidedly tied in one situation, or might even be working together. Edge bugs also occur involuntarily, letting you slide off edges when really wanting to b-hop, for example on a rail. The infinite health door is not just a wrongly coded damage output of a door giving you 1 health per frame when stuck, but a sequence of actions necessary to complete. You cannot load into the map, and to complete the map, you need to do several tricks, single segment. Think of the IHD starting the map before, with getting the Zero-Ammo-Gausscharge to not lose too much ammo. Getting past those 2 alien grunts and not get hit. Get the medkits, not get hit by the Vortigons if possible. Get the Gauss boost up on the wall and out of bounds. Then dealing with this first soldier that is in your way, and at the same time, with the SMG grenade, scare the second soldier a little more towards the door. Make him attentive to you, and scare him to open the door with the grenade. The last part might be fairly easy, just counting your cycles and continuing on. At some places you have boxes with items next to explosive crates, as for example here in Blast Pit. Making them break at the same time but separately with a double shot from the shotgun will make the game believe the box with the item broke twice. Once by the shotgun and a second time by the explosive crate. Then the box will drop its item twice as well. Collision anchors either work when pressing into a corner with an angle of less than 90 degrees. In the hunger, there is something like a vertical crack where 3 wall elements are built on each other to show different textures. At these very cracks, it is possible to get stuck and lose fall damage. We are now at the end of the tutorial, and I want to provide some links, just to mention a few. Some tutorials by Dot, Neo and Triads. I said that before, but here they are again. A lot of the tricks that have been described on sourceruns.org. Links to how physics are working. And then the command lists and pages where you find basic commands, BXT commands, cheat commands, or the map names. I also included the whitelist of commands that can be used for speedrunning Half-Life. In the end, of course, I want to show you again the speedrun.com page where we are having our leaderboards for Half-Life. And you are very much welcome to step by and start speedrunning yourself. We are a very helpful community and might help you out getting the tricks and improving your times. And of course, I want to mention sourceruns.org once more, because there most of the information are housed. Thank you everybody for watching. I hope you found it insightful and interesting and you enjoyed it. And thanks again to everybody who helped me make this tutorial.